over the next year, we will reach out to you, converse with you, dream with you to reimagine our city for the future. As part of our review of our long-term land use plans, we seek your inspiration and ideas to partner you to shape Singapore. And I hope to meet many of you in the coming months.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World City Summit 2021 webinars. I am Ren-Ai, your MC. Thank you for joining us at Rethinking Global Cities in a New Era. In a few moments, I will introduce Professor Greg Clark, our moderator, who will introduce our panelists. This will be followed by a moderated discussion with our panelists and an audience Q&A. Simultaneous interpretation in Mandarin is available for this webinar. To access this, click on the Interpretation tab on your Zoom toolbar and then select Chinese. Some of you have already submitted questions to our speakers in advance, but you can also ask questions using the Q&A tab. If you need any help, please use the raise hand function. We are pleased to announce that today's webinar is organized to support Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority Long-Term Plan Review, which begins with a year-long public engagement exercise to review Singapore's long-term land use needs and strategies and shape a collective vision to chart Singapore's next chapter. This WCS webinar will share urban strategies and ideas that the public and private sector can explore for Singapore and other cities of the future. Today's event is also held in partnership with the Urban Sustainability R&D eSymposia 2021, a year-long series of webinars co-organized by 20 ministries and agencies. Through these webinars, the eSymposia seeks to share with the community the RIE 2025 research plans under the Urban Solutions and Sustainability domain, and to forge new partnerships to both promote interdisciplinary research and translate research outcomes for deployment. With that, let us dive right into our speakers sharing for Rethinking Global Cities in a New Era. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our moderator for this session, Professor Greg Clark, Group Advisor, Future Cities and New Industries HSBC Group and Chair of Connected Places Catapult. He has also been the moderator of past editions of the WCS Mayors Forum at World City Summit. I will now leave the next segment in his hands. Professor Clark, please.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us at this World City Summit special seminar. And I want to say a special welcome, firstly, to our distinguished panel, who I'll introduce to you in a moment. But I also want to say a big welcome to the 306 people who are joining us live now. And also a thank you to the thousands of people who will watch this webinar later when it's a convenient time for them. Let me just mention immediately who our distinguished panelists are, and we'll shortly hear from each of them. Firstly, we have the Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy from Indonesia, Minister Pak Sandiaga Uno, and it's great to have him here with us. We also have the Chairman of the China Development Research Foundation, Mr. Li Wei. We have the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Mayor Andy Burnham. We have the Deputy Mayor of Paris, in charge of international affairs, Deputy Mayor Arnaud Ngatcha, and it's great to welcome him as well, and the Vice President for Global Business Environment at Shell, Mr. Jeremy Bentham. Now, normally we'd have a big round of applause to welcome them all, so we're just going to, for one moment, smile our welcome towards them. Welcome to our distinguished panelists. Great to have you here with us. Now, the format is going to be very straightforward. In a minute, I'll do a very short introduction, and then immediately our panelists will begin speaking. Each of them will be invited to take about 4 minutes to answer what I think is the core question for us this afternoon, which is why and how do we need to rethink global cities, and what are the new imperatives? Each of them will give us their thoughts about that, drawing upon their own experience. Then I'll ask each of them some questions based on the questions that you sent to us when you registered to come to this webinar, and you'll be able to hear your questions put to our panelists. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions to be asked directly from you via the Q&A function, as you heard before. We'll also have a poll, and we'll look at the results of the poll that some of you have answered as you've registered for the seminar. So let's get on with it. What I want to do is to set the scene very quickly and simply say this, that we're entering the 5th decade of the century of the city. That century began in 1980. It will end in 2080. By 2080, 10 billion people will live in roughly 10,000 cities. 80% of the world's population will be living in cities by then. The number over the century will have tripled, and the percentage of people will have doubled from roughly 3.5 billion people to roughly 10 billion people, roughly 40% to 80% of the world's population living in cities. And so as we enter this 5th decade of the century of the city, there are very good reasons to think about whether we should revise the way our cities work. These, of course, include the climate emergency, which many of us have been thinking about and talking about in detail over the past weeks during COP26. The pandemic, which of course has asked all sorts of questions about how our cities work, but also changes and revisions to the way that our global systems of trade and exchange work, as well as revealed challenges that exist within our cities. From 1980 to 2020, over the last 40 years, globalization was one of the key drivers of urban development. And because of that, cities emerged that we started to call global cities. Initially, it was a small number. We talked about New York and Hong Kong and Tokyo and Paris and London, cities that were focused on finance, professional services, corporate headquarters. But over the last 20 years, many, many more cities have become global cities through innovation, technology, advanced industries, higher education, maybe creativity and media, or perhaps with the focus on international meetings and tourism. And more than 100 cities today are recognized as global cities in one way or another. In these cities, the populations have grown faster and the jobs base has increased more quickly than in other cities. These cities have become more international, more cosmopolitan kinds of places. They've expanded their global connections through transport, through trade, through institutions, and also through digital infrastructure. And some cities have become great centers of diplomacy and decision-making. They've tended to create jobs quickly, and they've spawned many new businesses and new enterprises. They've become very entrepreneurial cities. And there's more than one kind of global city that has emerged. For these nations, the cities have been very important because they've added to the rate of growth. They've added to the internationalization of the people, the workers, the customers, the sources of capital, the jobs, the events, and the innovations. And they've accelerated economic growth through this process of being gateways for their nations. And of course, many nations have more than one global city. But there have also been some unintended consequences of globalization becoming such an important feature of how our cities work. Some of these cities, for example, have become very expensive and unaffordable to local people because their property, particularly their housing, has become more attractive to external investors. Others have become overwhelmed by the growth and have not been able to cope, and it's produced congestion, pollution, gridlock, because investment in infrastructure has not kept up with the growth of population. And similarly, there's been not enough investment in amenities. Some of these cities have attracted capital and talent from within their own countries, and they've altered what we might call the spatial balance within those countries, perhaps resulting in the accusation that they have, in some senses, drawn opportunities away from the rest of their countries. Some of the cities, of course, that were former ports or trade hubs, many of them have become more vulnerable to sea level rises. That's been a very particular challenge. And of course, international travel that's happened a lot through these cities has added to global carbon emissions. So although these cities have created lots of jobs and new enterprises, and they've attracted new talent and capital, sometimes those jobs have been jobs only for the high skilled. And that has led to, in some cases, accusations that the global city has created a more separated city, a city that is less equal. So for all of these reasons, as we enter the 5th decade of the century of the city, it makes sense to ask the question, do we understand the advantages and the disadvantages of the global city, and do we need to review and to revise it? So let's now look forward to hearing from our speakers. I'm asking them one simple question. Why and how should we rethink global cities in our new era? And what are the new imperatives? And I'm going to ask Minister Pak Sandiaga Uno to go first. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Warm greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. That's really a good question, and I'd like to address it in a way of my experience coming from managing the biggest capital or the biggest city in Indonesia, Jakarta, and we participated in World City Summit before, and now my current duty as the Minister for Tourism and Creative Economy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very prestigious event. And the questions that Professor gave us is actually in a very opportune time, because as we are now witnessing in every corner of the cities, have a potential to be a space of tourist and creative economy engagement. There is a need to cater for this new urban tourism as we grow into this pandemic and transition to the endemic, along with the citizens' need because of, in some cities, there have been lockdowns. So they really need to come up in the post-pandemic era in terms of how this COVID-19 has brought forth more opportunities for cities to rebuild and rethink the policies, in particular in relations to mobility, in relations to creative economy, and making sure that this new era are a responsible and sustainable era. If you talk about tourism and creative economy, UNWTO projected that the number of tourist arrival will be almost 90% down. So you're talking about domestic type of mobility. The global economy also in the international tourism space would actually be at a standstill. And if you're looking at the cost to the global economy, is between 1.2 trillion to 3.3 trillion, including indirect costs. In Indonesia itself, the number of inbound tourists fell around 75.03%. And we only have 4 million tourists compared to 16.1 million international arrivals in 2019. So if you look at the areas such as Batam, cities such as Jakarta and Denpasar, these are 3 major cities that receive international tourists. They are seeing the economy completely collapse. So what do we do? To answer Professor's questions, we need to innovate, we need to adapt, and we need to collaborate more. We need to innovate using solutions and alternative using technology, artificial intelligence, as well as robotics. Yes, there will be jobs lost, but there will be new quality jobs that we could actually implement by way of adapting, because we are adapting to the new protocol of CHSE, cleanliness, health, safety, and environmental sustainability. And through pentahelix collaborations, actually relevant stakeholders are taking part of the recovery program from corners that we never even think about it in the past. So the recovery steps are very clear in terms of how and why we need a new strategies for the cities post-pandemic. First, that we need to improve the human capital in terms of capacity building in order for them to be able to cope and to compete in this new era. Second, we need to revitalize the destinations, i.e. cities or the creative economy centers by way of soft and hard infrastructures. We need to improve resilience and business competitiveness, as well as we need to promote product and service innovations with a new type of approach of localized, personalized, customized, and smaller in size. These are what cities needs to be thinking of. Market recovery and expansions would not be the same like how recovery was done in the past. Using UNWTO assumption that 75% reductions of tourism in countries with low vaccination rates and 37% reductions in countries with relatively high vaccination rates would need to force cities in order for them to be able to attract MICE, meeting incentive conventions and exhibitions like WCS next year in Singapore. You need to make sure the vaccinated programs and policy will need to be coordinated. So I'd like to close my remarks by saying that seamless visitors experience to cities through responsible and sustainable tourism development. We are embarking here in Indonesia, whereby we are using this pandemic to completely shift the tourism attractions to be more quality-based, not quantity, and sustainable-based. It's no longer sun, sea, and sea, and sun, sea, and the concept of having a lot of fun, but more spirituality, serenity, and sustainability. It's wide opportunity for cities to build back better in a post-COVID world. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Minister, thank you so much for these very important remarks. So in a way, your question, your answer is we must get back to being open, to being global, but we do it now with a new consciousness, a new responsibility, a new spirituality, indeed, as you said. Thank you so much. We go now immediately to Mr. Li Wei. The same question for you, Mr. Chairman. Why and how should we rethink global cities in the new era, and what for you are the new imperatives?
Dear Professor Clark, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would share some of my views and to answer your question. First of all, I'm very glad to attend this summit. This summit is of great significance to discuss the future development of global cities in the new era. The global city is the center of globalization. It has great leadership in promoting economy and culture and innovation. It has significant meanings in promoting city in global and international collaboration. I would like to talk about 3 points. First of all, cities should play a key role in promoting world economic growth. The COVID-19 pandemic has bring heavy impact to the value chain globally and resulted in the shortage of labor and transport and provide and posed barriers for transportation. Globally, we have good production elements, infrastructure, and complete industry chains in the big cities. For example, take New York as an example. The population is about 15% of the total in US, and the GDP is about 20% of that in the US. Shanghai, as the center of the Yangtze River Delta, population is about 10% of the total in China, and GDP is about 20.2%. So the economy and employment of global cities is steady or stable. That will play a keystone role to the recovery and growth of world economy. Secondly, the global cities needs to play an important role in inclusive growth and development. Aristotle has said that people come to the city for better life and to stay in the city. So city is a place with the hope and expectations from people. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought comprehensive impact to the economy and social and life of people, but the impact is larger to the middle and lower income classes in the city. In fact, this has enlarged the divide between the poor and the rich and the inequality. According to the data of ILO in January 2021, the global workers have lost about 3.7 trillion US dollars of income during the pandemic. And that was the first year of the pandemic. And currently we're in the second year already. So to concentrate the city resources to provide comprehensive public service systems and to provide attraction for the global, for the employment, and to provide better opportunities and more inclusiveness so that the lower and middle income groups can enjoy and share the development result of city. Thirdly, the global cities should be playing a leadership role in sustainable development. In the recent years, we have seen there are extreme weather events and climate events happened because of the climate change. And this has brought serious damages to life and assets of human. And the urban areas have been the source of consumption of more than 2/3 of the energies and generated more than 70% of the carbon dioxide. And so to reach the carbon peak and carbon neutral goal, cities are the main battlefield for sustainable development. And global cities has in itself R&D and innovation capabilities. So policy tools can play a leading role to guide the global climate change and governance. In the 1980s in China, we have many cities starting from small to big, from big to strong, to become world level hub in a global city network. According to some consultant reports, in Global City Index 2021, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and these global cities have been raised to top 10, and Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, and Chengdu, all these cities have been elevated in the rankings. These are good things, and they made Chinese people's life better, but it also means China will have to shoulder more responsibilities globally. And the global cities in China are willing to strengthen the communication and collaboration with other global cities around the world and to jointly tackle the challenges globally. Although COVID-19 pandemic are still ongoing, in the planet, but we firmly believe that through the joint efforts by global cities in the world, we will welcome the beautiful and warm spring after the cold winter. So if I have more time, I will answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So many important points that you made, but you said it very clearly, that the cities have to drive economic growth because the world and the growing population needs that. Secondly, they have to be inclusive and create opportunities for people at every level of skill and income and age and level of health. And thirdly, that they have to be the mechanisms for driving sustainable development and for decarbonizing our cities. And of course, we congratulate you and everybody else involved for the fantastic progress that the Chinese cities have been making. And no doubt we'll speak more about that in a minute. I'd like to now bring in Mayor Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Andy, Mr. Mayor, very good to see you. Can I ask you the same question? Why and how do you think we should rethink global cities in this new era? And what are the new imperatives from your point of view?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Greg. Hello, everybody. I'm speaking to you from a place that people called the original modern city. Manchester was the home of the first industrial revolution, and the city modernized as a result of that. But as I look at things today, I look at our friends in Singapore, and thank you to you all for hosting this World City Summit. I think we are being brought together today by perhaps the most forward-facing city in the world, certainly a global city, and we appreciate you making this forum happen today. So, Greg, to answer your question, I'll take it in the two parts. Firstly, why should we rethink global cities? And I think I'm picking up from the last speaker, Li Wei, in making the points that I'm about to make. I think the truth of the matter, for all of the success that our cities have had, we have seen levels of inequality in our cities that I think are too high. Nearly all of the biggest cities in the world have seen a growing problem with homelessness over the years before the pandemic. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that housing costs have got too high for many people within the city, combined with work for some people, which is low paid and insecure. So the gap in cities between those with the least and those with the most has got wider and wider over the years. Now, why does this matter? I think the pandemic, it mattered before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has brought home why it really matters. And that's because it's clearly difficult for people in the position where they don't have secure employment to protect their own health, but that affects the health of everybody else. Certainly here, we saw people unable to stop working if they needed to self-isolate or if they were ill. And of course, that has led to a high case rate in some cities, certainly in the cities of the north of England through the pandemic. So I think that's just an honest reflection as to where cities had got. I think the levels of inequality had got too great. But then the question comes to how we rethink global cities in the modern era, in this new post-pandemic era. Well, I believe the drive to net zero could offer the solution to the problem I've just identified. If cities go faster towards carbon neutrality, that can be the route to improve people's homes. Obviously, by retrofitting them to make them carbon neutral, it could also lead to wider improvements to the home, but also reduce the energy bills that people pay. If we do the same with public transport, if we modernize it, decarbonize it, we can make it much more affordable for people. Indeed, some cities around the world are beginning to make public transport free. And this whole process of decarbonization can create good, long-term, well-paid, secure jobs for our residents. So I can see that the time is up, Chair. So I will just finish by saying we've got to make sure that the drive to net zero is also a drive to reduce inequality. And cities are the places where this theory could be proved. There is a risk that the drive to decarbonize could widen inequality if we let all of the costs fall on individuals. I think we should go at it a different way and support cities through this change so that we can arrive at a place where we have clean, more livable cities, cities that promote people's health, but are also much more equal in terms of the narrowed gap between those at the bottom and those at the top. And Manchester has always been the home of industrial progress, but with social progress together. And we very much are looking to prove this principle as we go on our own journey to carbon neutrality by 2038. Thank you very much indeed, Greg.
Thank you very much, Mayor Andy Burnham. So clear what you've said, that inequality in our cities was becoming far too high. The pandemic has revealed just how unjust that's been, but the road to carbon neutrality, to net zero, is potentially a way to resolve that problem and to create better quality of life, better cost of living, better job opportunities for everyone. You said it so clearly. Thank you so much. We'll come back with another question for you in a minute, if we may, Mr. Mayor. Now, I want to go now to the Deputy Mayor of Paris, Mr. Arnaud Ngatcha, to ask him the same question. Mr. Deputy Mayor, good afternoon, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Why and how should we rethink global cities in our new era? And what are the new imperatives as you see it?
Good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for this invitation. There is no doubt that the COVID crisis has changed the way Parisians relate to the city. Since the lockdown, we have learned to work from home and rely on newly developed sectors of the economy like home delivery and shipping services. Those are all structural changes that will remain. But I'd like to widen to scope of the subject at hand. This is not the only issue that cities, large and small, will have to deal with in our new area. Indeed, along with the health crisis, we are also facing a major climate crisis that we must address. COP26 just ended. Despite some progress, it is now clear that the outcomes are not meeting expectations. Yet, everything points to the necessity to go faster. The latest EPC report is clear. We are heading for disaster. Fires and climatic disaster follow on another. Our population are in danger. Limiting global warming to 1.5 degree is an obligation. But cities have been addressing these issues for a long time. We were pleased to receive from the United Nations the Global Climate Actions Award for the City of Paris Climate Plan at COP26. This award recognizes the long-term effort undertaken by Paris since 2007. Close to their residents, cities are the forefront for the fight against climate change, and it is directly linked to the COVID crisis. For it seems obvious to us in Paris that recovery from the health crisis requires a green recovery. Green recovery in Paris consists of major concrete projects that we have already launched. The construction of 400 of new bicycle lanes, the planting 170,000 trees, the greening of 30 hectares for facades and roofs, the refurbishing of 5,000 housing units per year to reduce food poverty and improve access to cleaner heating solutions, a significant decrease in the number of cars in the city's historic center to reduce air pollution, 100% sustainable food by 2026, 50% of which will be sourced from local markets. We are also to have implemented innovative concept. The 15-minute city, for instance, aims to bring local and essential services closer to Parisian residents. The Oasis courtyards is another innovative concept, formerly built of concrete and close to the public. Greener and fresher school yards now provide the neighborhood with a color environment during its wave outside of school hours. Rethinking our cities requires us to combine a number of imperatives to render them more pleasant, peaceful, and resilient to live in. I will finish with a call to action. Cities are strong when they learn for each other and share their practices, and city networks enable us to do so. During COP26, Eric Garcetti, mayor of Los Angeles and outgoing chair of C40, who coordinates the City Race to Zero campaign, presented Nigel topping with a list of 1,049 cities that have committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. These local authorities' commitment on belief of 722 million people represents a global emission reduction potential of at least 1.4 gigatons per year by 2030. So cities are succeeding in giving us hope. And we owe this to our citizens, but especially to our youth. Young people are calling for action. And as always, you can count on Paris to meet these challenge. Excuse me.
Deputy Mayor, thank you so much for this very clear statement, and in particular for Paris's inventiveness to remind the world that we have to grow back better and be greener, but also some of the many innovations that Paris has produced. And your comments about the collaboration between cities is very important. Now, before I ask Mr. Jeremy Bentham to comment, let me remind our now 350 people who are live with us, welcome again, that we'd love to receive your questions in the Q&A. So we already have some questions there, some very good questions coming in for Mayor Andy Burnham. Some very interesting other questions have arrived as well. Please send your questions, because after the next round, we'll get immediately onto those. Now let's come to Mr. Jeremy Bentham and ask him the same question. Jeremy, great to see you. Why do you think we should be rethinking our global cities in the new era? And what do you see as being the new imperatives? Jeremy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I believe you might be muted. And I apologize for that, because the production team were, of course, managing the microphones. We can't hear you. We can see you speaking, but we can't hear you.
How's that now?
That's better. Jeremy,
okay.
Please start again, and we apologize.
Sorry, that's fine. And pleasure to join this summit, and once again have relationship with the Centre for Liveable Cities and the Urban Redevelopment Authority. I'm going to amplify and speak to some of the things that other great speakers have introduced. The new era clearly involves our recovery from the pandemic, and the new era clearly involves decarbonisation of the economy. Now, the future is never clear, but we've found for decades that it's helpful to grapple with the future through looking at alternative scenarios. And as individuals, as cities, and as societies, we would like to have everything, but we have limited resources, And so what we give our attention to drives different scenarios. And our research around the world has integrated 3 main clusters of priorities in the recovery from the pandemic: wealth, security, and health. So the city's main focus is on wealth, clearly be rapid, but it will be volatile as waves of infection recur. So resilience is seen as economic strength, but with the relative neglect of social issues, financial inequalities grow, as Andy mentioned, a real worry. People once celebrated as key workers in the pandemic find themselves still in underpaid, underappreciated jobs. So there is labor unrest eventually, slowing productivity. And because of the neglect of climate issues, extreme weather events bring a political backlash and disruptive knee-jerk reactions to decarbonize the economy. Repeated around the world, this scenario is a pathway to around 2.3 degrees global warming. Now, if a city's main focus is self-sufficiency, security first, then an island's mentality develops. In this kind of world, the protection of narrowly defined self-interests becomes central. So global trade becomes constrained, economies languish. There's a widespread fear and resentment as cities turn inwards. They don't share good practices. Social tensions between different city communities begin to grow. Local pollution may improve in some cities, but global action on climate slows. So this scenario is a pathway to beyond 2.5 degrees centigrade global warming. And finally, if a city's main focus is well-being, that health priority first, the path to resilience is seen as reforming what's been exposed as weak in the pandemic. Cities proceed cautiously, but using innovative technologies for virtual working, for testing, tracing, vaccination. Lessons are learned from the way the international medical and scientific communities have both collaborated and competed in developing healthcare practices and vaccines. Lessons are learned about investing to reduce social inequalities, to reduce tensions and potential pockets of infection. Lessons are learned from the 2008 financial crisis about how green investment can be a very effective way of generating jobs and domestic advantages. So this investment structurally lowers emissions and puts the world on a pathway to achieving the 1.5 degree Paris aspiration. So to summarize, the choices and priorities of cities have huge implications for everybody's quality of life for decades ahead, whether they're in cities or outside. And the better outcomes involve attention to 3 main things. 1, collaboration across commercial and public-private boundaries. 2, attention to social justice. And 3, pioneer leadership in smart investment and in smart policy making. Those are the lessons from our scenarios looking at cities. Thanks.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. And again, superbly succinct with your focus on how to link the recovery from the pandemic with the decarbonisation process and all the benefits that that will bring, underpinned by collaboration, social justice, and pioneering leadership, I think you said. So thank you very much indeed. Now, let's go immediately to the questions that you, the delegates, submitted when you registered. And we received many questions from you, and some of them were more or less on the same topic. So we've amalgamated them. So if you don't quite hear the words you sent us, please don't be surprised. I'm going to start with our mayor and our deputy mayor first. And I'd like to bring Mayor Andy Burnham back to the screen. Andy, one of the questions was asked was about digitization. And we thought that this was a very good question to ask you because Greater Manchester is widely recognized as one of the most important digital economies in Europe, if not the world. So how can digitization, as you see it, help with this progress that we're trying to make on economic, social, and environmental goals in our global cities? What role does digitization play? Is it a tool that you as a leader can use?
Oh, certainly, Greg. I think digitalization and decarbonisation go very much together. They will be the twin driving forces of the 21st century economy. And it's why I've set Greater Manchester's ambitions to be the UK's leading green city region, but also leading digital city region. We are the fastest growing digital and tech hub in Europe at the moment, and that is very much part of our story. But to answer your question as to how digitalization may address some of the issues that we've discussed so far during the summit this morning, of course, before we look at it as a solution, I go back to what I said at the beginning. It could be a new source of inequality, I'm afraid to say again, because the world has taken a massive leap into the digital space during the pandemic. More and more conversations are being had in the digital space and in digital rooms like this one. Public services are being provided digitally. I'm sure in other places represented on this call, more primary care services, GP services are being delivered by digital means and other things too. And the risk, of course, is that if people don't have access, not just to a device, but to the data connectivity, or can't afford to pay for that on a regular basis, again, that could be a source of widening inequality. So we have put this issue higher up our agenda post-pandemic, and we believe we almost have to look at digital connectivity now as an essential utility like water, energy. This is absolutely critical for people's lives now, but also critical for opportunity, for social connection, combating loneliness amongst older people. So we've set an ambition. Leading digital city region doesn't just mean we have lots of inward investment and jobs, and all of that is really good, or really good infrastructure. And we know Singapore is probably the leaders in this, fantastic digital infrastructure. We're working on that. I think you've got to have a plan to have all of your residents connected, all of your residents online. So we have set a goal to say that all under 25 should be online, and we're working towards that. All disabled people online, because we know some have struggled during the pandemic with lack of online connectivity, and all older people online. And we're developing not just public spending solutions to do that, but asking businesses to work with us and provide devices, provide access to connectivity. I think a true digital city in the future is one that will help all of its residents online. And we're certainly working towards that, Greg.
Great, thank you very much, Andy, if I may. And there's so much to dig into there in what's happening in Greater Manchester. I encourage people to have a look at what you're doing because it's fascinating. But let's go to Paris, if we may, and Deputy Mayor Ngatcha. So another question that was submitted by our delegates was around the changing roles of public sector and private sector. Do you think that these are changing, and do they need to change in the revised global city?
Yes, Grace, I mentioned during my speech the interdependence of our societies is observed on a daily basis. Climate change, the health crisis, the fight against economic and social inequalities, and migration are all challenges that remind us every day of the extent to which global issues influence the daily life of each individual, each society, and each territory. The public and private actors involved in urban regulations are faced with a difficult situation that is due as much to the urban changes themselves as to the recent upheavals in the way cities are managed. A wide variety of phenomena are combining the explosion of mobility, the deregulation of public service networks, the multiplication and hierarchization, excuse me, it's complicated words, of actors and phenomena of social and spatial exclusions. We are witnessing the emerge of action logics with variable territorial geometry, which correspond to the multiplication of actors and spatial scales, and which are favored by the reconfiguration of central, local, and public-private relations. A multitude of actors gravitate around international actions, forming a complex but rich network at the service of local authorities, provided that they take the trouble to activate it. It offers a variety of resources. They can be mobilized for technical support, exchange of best practices, obtaining financing, or even assistance in building an international strategy. The actors range from the local to European level via the regional and national levels. The MEIE and the European Union are the main partners of local authorities. Paris, like other local authorities, emphasize the central role of citizens in its international action. Most of them already involve them in their projects, while wishing to include them more or better in their actions and regretting for some that citizens are not more involved. The global context is changing rapidly. The COVID-19 crisis and question about excessive globalization highlight the need to step up actions in favor of sustainable development, but also to work with local actors, with the aim of achieving a common benefit for local authorities and their international public and private partners. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, thank you very much. You've made the point that there's a lot of complexity in these relationships, but that actually we need a cohesive approach where citizens are at the center. So it's very, very good point. Let's go immediately to our Minister. Minister, good to bring you back into the conversation. In your earlier remarks, you talked about the importance of tourism, and a number of our delegates have asked the question about tourism, and particularly how do we recreate tourism in a way that's safe for everybody? So how do you think tourism will be different in our cities after the pandemic?
Well, it will completely be very different, as a short answer, Professor. And actually, the entire sector of tourism, not only urban tourism, but also rural tourism, village tourism, tourism based on nature or culture, is going to have to revamp. But not only we need to make them survive, they will revive, and soon we will thrive, because tourism businesses that are going bankrupt are being restructured. Cities are suffering economically, and government is trying to inject stimulus package. Tourists in the post-pandemic era will have much higher expectations, Professor, in terms of cleanliness, health, safety, environmental sustainability. We are now developing a new era of tourism on quality and sustainability. And to accommodate those requirements, cities, which is also a tourist destinations like Jakarta, Denpasar, and Batam, should prioritize offering services, facilities, and experience that cater to health, safety, and overall well-being for tourists and its citizens. I have got inquiries now, Professor, that a lot of the young millennials who travel all over the world to Bali, wanting to engage in tourism activities that actually offset the carbon that they use to get to Bali. So we are going to have to prepare activities, including in global cities, so that not only we handle the health protocols, but also the activities of the new era of sustainability. And in Indonesia, we have opened our borders in Jakarta and Bali with several preconditions like pandemic controlled areas, vaccinations program completed, health protocol on the end-to-end basis, and industry readiness. We are reopening, but we are reopening towards a different type of tourism. It is going to be carried out on a small incremental baby steps gradually. We're hosting G20 next year. So we need to really have a thorough monitoring and evaluations. Like for this Christmas, although our daily new case is about 300 to 400, we are actually going to have a tighter restriction because we don't want to take any risk associated with the next wave of new COVID cases due to the new variant. So technology will, like Mayor Burnham said, technology will play a great role. We have an app now to basically identify suspects and vaccinated areas to create a cashless, contactless, seamless journey through digital and innovative experience. We're using virtual reality, augmented reality, and 3D. So global cities will need to engage all stakeholders, including Jakarta and Denpasar, as well as other cities like Surabaya, to successfully open the urban destinations for tourists post-pandemic. I think events such as MICE or the tourism that is based on gastronomy tourism, sports tourism will be among the early winners. I think we also need to enhance our collaborations in shaping for better future of regulations, green economy, resilient communities, and more inclusive development for sustainable future. We are electrifying the transportations in 5 super priority destinations. So by 2030, Bali and 5 super priority destinations will all be hopefully primarily in terms of vehicle, it will be mostly electric. And we are introducing a very aggressive new and renewable energies, waste management technologies based on local wisdom, as well as a much better technology for water conservation and water management. Professor.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll come back for some other questions in a moment with you if we may, but your key focus there on sustainability and using technology to really make things safe. And of course, we look forward to the great success you'll have with the G20 next year. Jeremy, may I come to you, because a couple of questions were asked by delegates about, you know, really the net zero transition and what it means for some of the spaces and places in our cities. People talk about empty petrol stations, the anxiety, as it were, that some of the ways in which our high carbon economy has used our cities could create in lots of spaces and places being redundant or obsolescent. So how will the net zero transition, as you see it, enable us to remake spaces and places so that they become really purposeful again?
Thanks, Greg. So I'm just checking first that we don't have the mute problem that I had
No,
earlier.
you're good.
Very good. Excellent. You know, as more people do more things in cities, there'll be a strong need for both more energy services and also the cleaner energy. And that will kind of drive 3 main developments. The first will actually be major strides in urban energy efficiency. And that will be through integration of urban services. So better integrated public transport systems will reduce congestion, energy use, and be powered by a combination of electricity, biofuels, hydrogen fuel cells, and that will vastly improve air quality. At the same time, there'll also be energy efficient integration of waste and water and power generation and district heating or cooling. And you see this already happening in several major cities like Amsterdam. Now, secondly, there'll be even greater electrification of the urban economy, largely powered by wind or solar, where that's possible, depending on location, hybrid with natural gas, where there isn't the land availability. This will enable the increased electrification of light-duty transport, as I mentioned, but also that will be accompanied by convenient on-street charging. There's a 50,000 Ubricities charge points I know Shell is intending to provide across the UK by 2025. There'll also be increased virtual working, increased digitalisation, and increased prominence of services over manufacturing as urban economies develop. So again, you'll see this shifting into electrification, services. And then thirdly, there will still be heavier duty urban activities, freight, marine, aviation, some heavy industry that will need energy dense, portable liquid and gaseous fuels. But these will be increasingly biofuels and hydrogen, with the remaining use of fossil oil and natural gas accompanied by carbon dioxide and capture. Now that will require new infrastructures. So again, integrating infrastructures. And I know we are working with the city of Rotterdam on a Porthos project in Rotterdam, and in Andes, United Kingdom, the Northern Endurance Partnership. And so this development also of new infrastructures. So there will be some things that are visible, the better air quality. There will be some things that are not visible, which are systems integration. Some thoughts.
Right. Jeremy, thank you so much. I think for everybody listening, it's an expert view on how decarbonisation, as it were, enables us to make better use of our spaces and places and cities. And I want to come now to Chairman Li Wei, because Mr. Chairman, I mean, one of the questions that our delegates are asking is, given all of this change that we've been talking about, decarbonisation, digitization, flexible working, much more kind of dynamic process of change, can we still plan our cities in the way we used to? Does it make sense to have 20-year plans and things like this? China has been on an incredible journey of planned urbanization, but will the nature of planning in our global cities change as a result of all this recent turbulence? What's your view, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Professor Clark. Thank you for your praise on us, and we have a lot of gaps to fill, and we also have to learn a lot of lessons. Recently, I think the COVID-19 pandemic is one of the major reasons, together with other weather and climate events. It's not a question of whether we want or whether we're capable or not to have long-term planning, but rather we have to simulate the experience to have long-term, comprehensive urban planning in dealing with unexpected incidents and large events. Why? Because this time, through the pandemic crisis, we have seen the vulnerability and structural problems exposed for each city, and these are the problems we have to focus on resolving in planning for the urban development in the long term. And that's also the major functionalities of cities, global cities, for us to further strengthen, and also the resilience we have to strengthen, so that global cities can become a place where we don't have short-term worries and long-term concerns for the civilians in there. Of course, we still have a large gap between the advanced cities, the global cities, and the remote cities. of course, this is the development level of the city is related to the economy level of that country and that region, and there are intrinsic as well as extrinsic reasons, and it is not something that can purely be resolved by planning. It has to be resolved by development, and global cities is a more complex, systematic mechanism. So for developing such a global cities, we need to have a comprehensive, all-around scientific planning with midterm and long-term goals in mind. It's hard to imagine that a city without planning, mid to long-term planning, how well they can develop into. For long-term planning, I do not think we need to change the characteristics of the planning, but rather we should change the corresponding structures and to fill in the concrete content in the structure, such as the vulnerability and the structural problems that I mentioned before. I think several speakers have shared in these aspects. For example, when we talk about the public and social service equality, the equal access, and also the social justice, right? I think these are issues existed in not only the developed but also developing countries and cities. It's a very prevalent. And in public service provision, if you look at the Chinese cities building and social development, we have to do more in improving people's life, living, but at the same time, we have to provide what people need. I mean, what the low and middle income people need. So necessities plus bonuses are all important. But to further answer your question, how to make long-term planning well, I believe that's the responsibility of the planning experts. I'm not an expert in that area. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Very thoughtful answer, actually, and I really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got lots of questions lining up, but just before we look at them, we're just going to go back to the poll that you did when you decided to join the seminar. And we asked you the question, what aspect of workspaces do you think will best suit your business or your work needs in the longer term? We wanted to look at how the spaces in our cities might change. And the majority of you said that it would be collaborative workspaces that supported hybrid work. Quite a large number of you said live, work, play districts with 24/7 elements. And then the third number said sustainable low carbon workplaces. And then quite a number of you said work commute below 30 minutes. I'm just going to ask our panelists if they want to comment. Do you think that after the pandemic and with regard to the decarbonisation imperative, do you think that the way we live and work in our cities and our patterns of working and commuting are going to change? Any panelists like to comment on that? Just put your hand up if you've got a view that you'd like to bring in. Panelists, yes, Minister, what's your view?
Yeah, I think this will be in line with the innovations whereby there will be the use of remote working devices. There will be adaptations as people don't go to the office Monday to Friday from 9 to 5 anymore. And there will be collaborative. And that's why number one is collaborative workspace, because people want to collaborate more. This pandemic forced us to innovate, to adapt, and to collaborate. And I think it also points to the quality aspect of post-pandemic living. They don't want to commute more than 30 minutes, definitely. They want to spend more time with the family. They want to do one Zoom sessions and maybe pat the pet or meet the babies, or, you know, sometimes don't have to wear proper trousers and we here, we wear sarong in Indonesia. Up here, we may dress in a proper batik, but sometimes we enjoy having that type of flexibility.
Yeah, so that new informality.
Yeah, less formal and I guess more personalized, and I would say customized type of living going forward.
Great, thank you very much. Mayor Burnham, do you have a view? Do you think that the pattern of working will change in Greater Manchester? Will you see a different pattern emerging?
I think it will, and it has done, Greg, to a degree. I think there is a tendency to overstate how it might change things. Certainly, we've seen in Manchester this summer a very strong return to the city. The football is as the football was. It's very, very busy. The trams are packed on match days, Manchester City, Manchester United. There's been big music events. People have wanted to get back to the city, actually, and I think the footfall has gone beyond what we thought it would be. In terms of the working day, though, I mean, the tourism point, obviously, like the minister, you know, we certainly see that as having come back strongly. The working day is a little different, though. Volumes on our tram system are at about between 70 and 80% of what they were. I think that reflects two things. One, that more people are mixing home and work. I think the number of people who are fully working from home is quite small now. I think it's a minority of people, probably 20 to 30% maybe. Most, I think, are mixing it more. So a kind of combination, and that's having an impact on the numbers of people on public transport. But I also do feel that in the UK, at least, there is a car-led recovery to a degree. People feel safer traveling by car, some by what we would call active travel, cycling or walking, but I think more the car. So I think there is a change, and the projections that I've got are that it won't recover to pre-pandemic levels for 2 or 3 years. I think the property industry in the city talks of companies maybe dropping a floor in terms of office space. So they had 3 floors, now they will take 2 floors, or you know. So it's not a sort of dramatic shift, but it is certainly a change. But back to the poll, you know, if that vacated office space by the big corporate organizations leads to more co-working space, so that people then can come in and work more flexibly, we think there's a need for more co-working space in our outlying areas. So not necessarily in the city core, but in the towns that are and the neighborhoods that are in the localities just outside of the city, maybe retail space being converted to co-working space. So people will mix home working, more local working, and city working, and have a slightly different working week than they had before. But I do think, caution, people predicting the demise of the city or you know, an exodus from the city. I certainly don't see that. I think people have been very, very glad to get back to Manchester this summer. Greg, I'm going to have to say, I'm going to have to leave you at this point, I'm afraid. I've really enjoyed being part of this summit this morning. Thank you very much. Have you got 30
seconds just to comment on the role of the citizens, Andy? Because one of the questions that was asked was, how do you get the citizens more engaged in this? Have you got a quick thought on that before you go?
I do have a thought on that. I think one of the changes that is permanent is the use of space in cities. Paris, I was in Paris last week, and it is amazing. I was listening to Arnaud, and I would absolutely vouch for everything that was said. Paris is rethinking the city and the allocation of space on the surface of the city. A much higher priority being given to cycling, you know, roads being kind of reallocated as we speak. And one of the big roads close to the Seine, you know, we saw how it had been completely closed actually and turned into a pedestrian space, which is really popular. But those moves are difficult, and I think it has to be done with people, not just imposed, because I think you then face a backlash from people. So I think cities will need to be redesigned in terms of the use of space. more pedestrianisation, more space for cycling, more use of simple means of mobility like the e-scooters or hire bikes. I think that will be a feature, but I do think there's going to have to be a kind of careful consultation with people being involved in the debate about how this scarce space should fairly be used. And these are difficult issues for cities, actually. They're very politically difficult issues. And I think citizens can, well, they must be engaged actually in those decisions. But in Paris, it would seem they were difficult arguments, but now there is big public support for some of the measures that have improved the livability of Paris.
Great. Andy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Greg.
I'm going to come to some of our other panelists. Thank you, Mayor Andy Burnham. Jeremy, Jeremy, if I may, we've got about 1 minute each to ask you a question before I introduce Hugh Lim, the Executive Director of CLC. Jeremy, there's one question here that is very much about, will the drive for sustainability in the big global cities be different from in what we might call the other cities or the normal cities? Have you got a view about that?
Well, first of all, I think the pressures will be the same. So you'll see some similarities. Probably global cities will be at the frontier and lessons will be learned. From what I said earlier, you'll recognize that learning lessons is actually one of the key drivers of the better outcomes. And just going back to the question that you had with Mayor Burnham about citizen and citizen involvement, clearly that involvement in the dialogue of citizens is critical, but it can be contentious. And that's where public use of scenarios can be very helpful, because you don't have an advocacy position, you have an exploratory position. Urban Redevelopment Authority works through Singapore scenarios. We've worked through multi-stakeholder scenarios with the city of Paris, multiple stakeholders there. The country of Slovenia has done that. It's a useful tool for engaging citizens, whether they're in the suburbs or in the urban centers themselves.
Very helpful, thank you. I'm going to ask Li Wei one question, if I may. Mr. Chairman, there's a question here that says, in the past, it was the cities were competing with each other for the biggest building, the best airport, the most fantastic tunnel. But after the pandemic, maybe there'll need to be less competition and more cooperation. What do you think about that, Li Wei? Do you agree, or you think the competition will come back?
Yeah, 这个全球政治啊，实际上
global cities are not silos. They are a cluster of cities. Before you answering question, I think there is one issue that we need to further discuss in city planning. How big or how wide area of coverage for a city is the best? So this is a transition from quantity to quality. If you reach to a certain quantity, can we reach an improvement of efficiency of resources and equity in allocation of the resources when we reach that balance? Secondly, in nucleus, in global cities, collaboration is larger than collaboration. It's larger than competition. Competition is a must, all right? It's a necessity because as a result, cities will compete for resources. If you follow the market rules, you can maximize the benefits by allocating more resources. However, this competition should be a benign competition, a good competition, rather than a zero-sum game. So I would like to emphasize that we need to strengthen the collaboration between countries and cities and cities. Sorry, he's becoming silent.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate that. And then the last comment, please, from our Minister. Minister, there's 2 or 3 questions in the Q&A that are about health and mental health. And they're making the point that throughout the pandemic, people's mental health has been very challenged, and quality of housing and quality of health has become a new priority. Do you think that's going to be better integrated into our cities as we move forward, Minister?
It has to. I saw in the Q&A, there's questions about mental health. We did, when I was Vice Governor of Jakarta, we did a study whereby we found 20% of the people living in Jakarta have some sort of mental issue, from a very, very light, minor issue to a more severe and more urgent or critical situation. So cities have to adapt because and this is where tourism and creative economy plays a major role. Under the creative economy, there's 17 subsectors that has been able to cater to improve the quality of the contributions to economy, in particular local economy involving communities. So in areas whereby we see a lot of pressure for the citizens, and that may yield in terms of some sort of like mental issues, we need to be, I guess, anticipating. Government needs to be there to address the issues. And I think the citizens' participations, the collaborations among the different districts, different precincts in the cities needs to be enhanced. And also the use of applications. Right now, the apps that sort of like address some of the early symptoms of mental issues can be detected. And when you know you have an issue, you consult. And this is whereby government and private sectors will need to collaborate together with education institutions to provide help desk and making sure that all those issues are addressed on an early basis. And that's how I think we would have a much better quality and more inclusive. And I think we need to realize that mental issue is going to be apparent in any type of society settings. And we just
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off a little bit there, but we're running out of time. We couldn't answer more than 5 of the questions, but at least we did that. I'm going to hand back to our MC to introduce Hugh Lim to give his conclusions. But I want to say personally my thank you to you, Minister, to you, Jeremy Bentham, and to you, Mr. Li Wei. I've really appreciated your comments. MC, back to you.
Once again, thank you, Park Sandiaga Uno, Mr. Li Wei, Mayor Andy Burnham, Deputy Mayor Arnaud, Mr. Jeremy Bentham, and Professor Greg Clark for this insightful discussion. It is my pleasure to now introduce Mr. Hugh Lim, Executive Director of the Centre for Liveable Cities, to deliver his closing remarks to mark the end of our WCS 2021 webinars. Mr. Lim, please.
Thank you very much, Renai, and to our distinguished speakers and our facilitator. Thank you very much for joining us for this concluding session of the World City Summit 2021. And to all of you watching from around the world, thank you for spending time with us. This is our 7th summit, and our theme, Livable and Sustainable Cities, Adapting to a Disrupted World, was conceived in late 2019, before anyone had ever considered the possibility of a worldwide pandemic disrupting almost every facet of our daily lives across the globe. Looking back at how COVID-19 has upended the status quo ante and the devastating impact of extreme weather on many cities, we could never have expected how relevant this theme would be. World City Summit 2021 has been a good opportunity for city leaders, experts, practitioners, and business leaders to gather, reflect, and exchange insights on how we can and must continue working towards livable and sustainable cities that are resilient, despite the onslaught of such prolonged disruptions. I'd like to share some key takeaways we have heard over the past 5 months of valuable sharing. Firstly, cities need a new framework to contend with the challenges which lie ahead. Singapore Ambassador at Large, Professor Chan Heng Chee, highlighted the link between COVID-19 and climate change and pointed to climate action as key to building a city's confidence. Alfonso Mora Garcia of the International Finance Corporation also shared how cities need to go on the grid or have green, resilient, and inclusive development to achieve the climate goals under the Paris Agreement. Thankfully, we do see more cities heading in this direction. Governor Anies Baswedan shared that Jakarta has been building green infrastructure and actively collaborating with businesses, academics, and think tanks to facilitate the growth of sustainable efforts such as active mobility. Yang Baojun, Chief Economist of the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development, revealed China's goal to encourage more green construction, and Mayor Cheng Wen-san shared how Taoyuan City encourages adoption of e-scooters through subsidies and providing city-wide charging stations. Bilbao aims to be green, digital, and inclusive, and Mayor Juan Marie Alberto emphasized the role of the ecosystem formed by institutions, businesses, universities, and technology parks to achieve this. In West Java, Governor Ridwan Kamil has set a goal to reach a 30% adoption of electric vehicles by 2030. Cities will also need to be flexible and adaptable through what Lim Eng Hui, CEO of Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority, calls planning for optionality. Multiple options so that cities can be more agile in adapting to changing societal needs and sometimes unpredictable circumstances. Cities can be flexible by planning urban spaces for multiple use. Desmond Lee, Singapore's Minister for National Development, mentioned that cities need to buffer white spaces that can be quickly deployed for alternative use, citing how Singapore's exhibition centers were activated as COVID-19 community isolation facilities. CEO of the Urban Land Institute, Ed Walter, shared that at the height of the pandemic, golf courses in Atlanta, Georgia, were open weekly to the public, and Rotterdam allowed restaurants to operate on the street without additional permits. A recurring theme throughout World City Summit 2021 was the need for a multidisciplinary approach to make our cities better. URA Chairman Peter Ho elaborated on the complexity of cities and how some actions may have led to unforeseen and often undesirable outcomes, such as air pollution. He urged cities to be living laboratories with platforms for testing out new approaches and solutions. In the private sector, companies such as the Salt System and Jacobs have been integrating multiple sources of data to help cities tackle urban problems. Professor Tim Stoner also shared how Space Syntax combines urban walkability data with real estate and public health data, revealing how street connectivity impacts both real estate values and residents' mental and physical health. Professor Cheong Koon Hien, chairman for the Center for Liveable Cities, raised a critical point about thinking long-term, besides taking an integrated approach to planning for cities, because, and I quote, "If you don't look long enough, you won't see the connections." Now, COVID-19 has amplified the inequalities faced by vulnerable populations. And as Minister Indrani Raja, Singapore's second Minister for National Development, said, cities must invest in a recovery that does not leave people behind. Ed Walter also emphasized that cities are best placed to rectify inequalities, and cities that do so will reap benefits in the long run. Thus, cities must be designed for people and with people. Under the program Weatherwise, Rotterdam conducts regular engagement sessions with every neighborhood to see how they might be affected by climate change and how they can work together to address its impacts. Speakers like Professor Lam Ki Po of the National University of Singapore, Sima Xiao of the Shenzhen Urban Planning and Design Institute, and Brian Young of BIG highlighted the importance of designing child-friendly and wheelchair-accessible developments and public spaces. Companies like Nirvana shared their goals of providing quality, affordable housing in economic centers in the region that integrate public and private transportation. Separately, Amy Chester and Cheng Xingyao of Guacoland noted that regular, honest, and transparent dialogue, even when officials do not know the answers, is critical in engaging people. While leveraging technology helps cities adapt to disruption, it needs to be human-centric. For example, Fukuoka Mayor Soichiro Takashima explained how proof of concept demonstrations help citizens understand and trust how technologies are applied. Sensible City Lab Professor Kalu Rati also recounted his experience in designing a facial recognition system that gave citizens the agency to opt out, and noted that allowing people to see the value of digitalization and shape its use increases user acceptance. The past 2 years have greatly challenged the status quo of cities and how they operate. However, as many have pointed out, and as this last panel discussion has shown, cities are still very relevant today and are key to helping the world emerge stronger from the disruptions. As a World City Summit community, we have shared that cities will need to adopt new frameworks centered on sustainability and resilience, be flexible and adaptable, take a multidisciplinary approach, and put people first if we are to continue thriving. We thank you for remaining connected with us from June till now, and with the help of technology, we have convened over 4,500 delegates from over 550 cities at World City Summit 2021 to date. However, meeting virtually cannot fully replace in-person engagements that allow for both formal and informal sharing and exchange of ideas. Thus, we are planning for a physical conference to mark our 8th edition of the World City Summit here in Singapore at the Sands Expo and Convention Center from the 31st of July to the 3rd of August 2022. We hope you can join us, and we look forward to welcoming you in person next year in Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hugh Lim. We have come to the end of the session. Playbacks of this session will be available on our YouTube channel, where you can also find videos of all our other WCS 2021 sessions. Please save the dates for World City Summit 2022, which will be happening in person in Singapore from 31st July to 3rd August. We hope that you'll be able to join us again next year. The Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore would like to hear your feedback and ideas on how the city can be planned and designed to best suit the needs of businesses in the longer term. Do scan the QR code on your screen or visit the website at go.gov.sg/LTPR to share your thoughts and learn more about Singapore's long-term plan review. Before you leave, please use the QR code or link to fill in our feedback form. Until our next session, goodbye.